Shut up, man. Shut up, I swear to God.
Daddy.
No! Shut up, man. Swallow. It's for your own good. Try to drink lots of water to flush that shit out of your system.
The film began with a 16-year-old American teenager named Davis who was having a great time with his girlfriend while taking drugs. Elsewhere, another boy named Angel, a 15-year-old, was pretending to be hit by a car. Then, when the driver came out to check if he was okay, his friend suddenly rushed to take the car. In that moment, Angel quickly grabbed his knife and stabbed the driver before running away. Meanwhile, somewhere else, a 17-year-old boy named Butch, who was a prisoner in a facility, was being tortured because he was accused of something by a guard. Fed up with the guard beating him again and again, Butch finally fought back and attacked the warden by pressing his eye. After these incidents, the three of them eventually met at the special juvenile prison in Enola Vale, located in the state of Montana, America, where Davis was arrested because he was proven to be a drug dealer. Angel was arrested for injuring civilians and being involved in carjacking, while Butch was moved from the previous institution after attacking the warden. Upon arriving at the facility, they were first searched all over their bodies to ensure that they were not hiding any prohibited items such as narcotics or weapons. After that, they were given uniforms and introduced to the warden of the facility, Sands, and a rehabilitation officer named Goodyear. Then the three of them were informed that in that prison, it was strictly forbidden to have weapons, cigarettes, any type of narcotics, and any activities that had anything to do with gangs were completely prohibited. After the search, they were taken to their rooms and shown their respective beds. In that moment, Goodyear reminded them that if the three of them could behave well, the judge would eventually grant them early parole. He also explained that Davis and the three of them were placed in the Level 1 category and were wearing dark blue clothes because they had just arrived at the prison, as the three of them were still in the evaluation stage to determine if they still had the will to be a better person by participating in rehabilitation. Goodyear explained that if they showed a positive change in attitude, they would be raised to Level 2 and dressed in black. In addition, they would also be trained with skills that would be useful when they were released later, whether to start a business, work in an office, or continue school. However, if they were determined to do bad things in prison, especially if they tried to escape, the prison authorities would give them orange uniforms and transfer them to a special unit where they would be punished severely so they could quickly repent for their mistake. On their first day, when they were having lunch at the prison cafeteria, Butch was provoked by another prisoner who worked in the kitchen, namely Banks. It turned out that almost all the inmates there knew that Butch had come to Enola Vale because he injured a guard in his old prison. So, Banks deliberately looked for trouble so that Butch would fight back and be put into a special unit. Fortunately, another prisoner named Max stopped and reminded Butch not to get easily provoked, or he would be taken to a special containment. Later, after the day's activities were finished, Davis and the others slept on their respective beds with the other prisoners. The next morning, Goodyear woke the inmates up early and tasked them to make their beds within 2 minutes to discipline them. Then, while mopping the corridor, Angel was called by a warden. On the other hand, Davis was bullied by Banks and his friends. But fortunately, he was still able to control his anger, even though Banks took his shoes.
They're looking pretty nice, man.
Don't look like
You
no
fucking lying to my boy?
You like that? How am I looking, huh?
Let's peace out here, boys.
After that, Banks and the others also bothered Butch, who was also mopping the floor by spitting from upstairs. However, Butch kept his calm because Goodyear was on guard. The next day, when Banks was on duty in the kitchen, he was seen secretly giving a small plastic bag of narcotics to a prisoner, and in the night, he and his gang beat Butch repeatedly while he was sleeping soundly and threatened to kill him if he dared to report them to the warden.
Shut up, man. Shut up, I swear to God, I'll be fucking red.
What the fuck you doing, man? Not in the face, nigga.
The next morning, Angel was scolded because her bed was still not made properly. After he was done with Angel, Goodyear asked about the bruise on Butch's eye. However, Butch lied, saying that last night he slipped and fell in the dark. It was clear Goodyear knew Butch was lying, so he told him to be honest next time. After that, the prisoners were given the task of digging the yard. Once they were done, Butch was immediately called to Sands' office to be asked about the bruise on his eye. Sands said that if he still didn't want to be honest, then he would be put in a special unit cell because he was considered to have caused trouble and didn't want to cooperate. However, despite being faced with that consequence, once again, Butch lied that he had slipped and fallen, which resulted in him being immediately transferred to a special unit cell where prisoners who were uncooperative were given harsher punishment for several days so that their behavior would improve. Meanwhile, in the room, Banks offered some of his drugs to Davis, and Davis did not refuse, as he was a drug addict and had been craving them. Then, when Davis was high, Banks deliberately scribbled on his face. At that moment, Banks's friend saw a photo of Davis and his mother in Davis's personal belongings box. Upon seeing that, they said that Davis's mother had come, but she eventually went home because Davis didn't show up. Not only that, but they also made a sexual slur about his mother. This was ironic because while Banks and his gang were placed in level 2 and wearing black shirts because they looked good in the eyes of the warden, their behavior was actually very bad. However, other prisoners never reported them because they were afraid, so they maintained their good image. After Banks left, Davis crawled out of the room, and Goodyear, who saw him, knew that Davis had just taken drugs. He quickly dragged Davis to the bathroom, and the drug was quickly removed from his body by gagging him until he vomited. Then, when he came to, Davis was dragged into the special unit cell, which was different from Butch's. The next day, some men with beards visited the prison while carrying a paper bag containing bread. Then, while the man was chatting with a prisoner, the bag was taken by one of the prisoners, who was used to dealing with drug dealers from outside and was working as a cleaning officer, because it turned out that the bread was fitted with drugs, and the old man was a smuggler. Then, in the laundry area, the bag was opened, and the boy handed the package over to Banks. Day after day passed, until finally, Butch and Davis were allowed to return to their usual cell. However, that afternoon, while Davis and Angel were sitting around relaxing and watching TV, they were suddenly disturbed by Banks's gang, who threw a ping-pong bat at him. Davis finally got emotional and decided to fight back. While it happened, Angel quickly covered the CCTV with clothes. At that moment, Butch, who saw the incident, immediately entered the room and beat up one of Banks's friends. Upon seeing that, the other one were scared and immediately told Butch where Banks was. After finding out where Banks was, Butch and Davis, who were fed up with Banks, immediately looked for him in the toilet and severely beat him. Because of that beating, Banks was injured so badly that he had to be treated intensively. Goodyear already suspected that the one who carried out the attack was Butch. Meanwhile, Davis's mother, who knew that her son was being bullied by other prisoners, wrote a letter of appeal to the prison authorities, knowing that Davis was angry because he felt he could still handle his own problems in prison. On the other hand, Angel was also visited by his father, who said that their family really missed him and wanted him to come back home. Then, while having lunch in the canteen, the inmate who had taken the drug from the smuggler before was having a drug transaction with a prisoner, and this time, Butch saw it. Later, during a mentoring session discussing anger management, two inmates got into an argument to the point that the warden had to show up to detain them.
Get a girl
Hey, yo, don't fucking call me no nigga.
But
Let's boys, that's enough.
you wanna fucking do this? Hey, I'm ready to.
What? Let's go! Let's go! Let's go!
Got you, baby! You are done! You hear that?
While that happened, Butch met the drug dealer and took all the drugs he brought by force. After what happened that day, before going to bed that night, Davis told a very interesting story to his cellmates about a scandalous experience he had with his girlfriend's mother. This seemed like a made-up story, but from this it could be seen that Davis had become closer to the other inmates. The next morning, all the inmates played dodgeball, and they were divided into two teams. This activity was designed to help them vent their anger and channel their emotions in a positive way to avoid any trouble or commotion. The game looked very exciting until it came down to a duel between Davis and Butch, which ended with Butch being hit by the ball, leaving Davis's team winning the game. Later that day, while hanging out in the laundry room and chatting, Butch was called to the prison warden's office, and the chief warden asked what his future plans were once he was released from prison. Being faced with that question, Butch explained that he wanted to enter a circus school to follow in his father's footsteps, who was also a circus performer. Upon hearing that answer, the chief warden explained to him that after investigation, it turned out that the warden who had been injured by Butch back at his previous institution had often committed other forms of violence, so Butch was going to be released in the next 2 weeks because what he had done was considered a form of self-defense. However, if he caused any trouble in this window of time, he would continue his sentence for 2 years in Enola Vale. And after that, when he turned 19, he would be transferred to an adult prison and serve the rest of his sentence, which was 4 years from now. In short, while the inmates were having lunch, the drug dealer inmate's face was slashed by another prisoner because he hadn't been able to give him some drugs. However, when the guards asked who the perpetrator was, no one wanted to admit or say a thing. But the next day, Butch, who had had enough of people being bullied, attacked the perpetrator, the one who ordered the drugs most often, and threatened to torture him more if he dared to attack anybody again. In this moment, it was shown that Butch was actually a good person who dared to fight bad people to help the weak, just like what he did to the warden in the previous prison. On the other hand, Sands forbade Goodyear from taking leave to celebrate his daughter's birthday because the prison was short of officers. Because of that, Goodyear had to tell his wife the bad news and face her anger. Then, while arguing on the phone with his wife, Davis, Butch, Angel, and Max overheard his conversation. Then, they talked about a female officer in the prison inappropriately. Angel even went so far as to draw the officer on the wall. Meanwhile, Goodyear, who was very emotional after arguing with his wife, got mad. His anger got the best of him as he began to corner Angel while saying that he had drawn the indecent picture. Angel, however, didn't show the slightest feeling of guilt, and instead fought back by biting Goodyear, causing Goodyear to push him onto the wall. Unfortunately, Angel hit the back of his neck. He then bled and fell unconscious. Shortly after, Sands and another guard arrived and immediately handcuffed Butch because he kept cursing Goodyear for his actions. A few hours later, Goodyear was devastated when he received news from the hospital that Angel had died because of the injury. However, he was not burdened with any legal sanctions for the death he caused. On the other hand, Davis was taking care of the laundry when suddenly he was approached by 2 of Banks's friends who wanted to take revenge. Unfortunate for Davis because he couldn't fight the 2 of them. He was pinned down and sadly sexually harassed by one of them. Because of that incident, Davis felt ashamed, sad, and humiliated. He was so restless that he wanted to call his mother to talk, but because it was still early in the morning, the warden forbade him and asked him to go back to sleep. However, it was a bad decision because Davis, who was so humiliated, finally decided to end his life by cutting his veins. The next day, after Davis was found dead in his cell, all the inmates went on a hunger strike, knowing that it was the guard's fault that led to his death. Moreover, the prison authorities did not provide any information about Angel's condition, so the inmates assumed that he was dead too. Soon, their emotions became uncontrollable, and a big brawl broke out. It started with Butch hitting a chair against the wall, and from there, the situation became really chaotic. Among the inmates, Butch was seen taking revenge on Banks's friend for sexually harassing Davis. Meanwhile, seeing the riot, the guards quickly put on protective vests, helmets, and used baton shields, even shot tear gas to disperse the inmates. In the midst of the chaos, Butch took the opportunity to break down the door and invited Max to escape. However, Max hesitated and returned to the canteen, leaving Butch to leave alone. After that, Butch quickly located the emergency exit door and broke the lock. Unfortunately, before he could leave far enough, he was immediately stopped when a warden broke his right calf with a baton, and he was dragged back inside. Because Butch had been involved in trouble and even attempted to escape, as the chief warden promised, his dream of freedom and entering circus school was over. He would remain at Enola Vale until he turned 19. Then, he would be transferred to an adult prison and would spend another 4 years in prison.